In the vast blue stretch of the Pacific during World War II, where steel titans clashed beneath humid tropical skies and the fate of nations trembled on the waves, one small ship wrote a story so extraordinary that it still echoes through naval history. This is the story of the USS England, a modest destroyer escort that within just 12 relentless days would do what no other warship had ever done before or since. It would sink 6 enemy submarines in less than 2 weeks, a record so astonishing that it remains unbroken to this day. Between May 19th and May 31st, 1944, this single American vessel hunted and destroyed an entire Japanese submarine line, one boat after another. It wasn't just a feat of skill or luck. It was the moment when intelligence, technology, and human determination collided to change the face of naval warfare forever. But the story of the USS England isn't only about advanced weapons or tactical brilliance. At its heart, it's a story of courage, about young men who trusted each other, their training, and a brand new technology while facing an invisible enemy deep beneath the sea. Surprisingly, the story doesn't begin with roaring guns or crashing waves. It begins quietly, in the back rooms of Pearl Harbor, far from the front lines. Inside a plain, unremarkable building, a group of American cryptographers worked in silence, surrounded by typewriters, radio receivers, and towering stacks of coded messages. On May 13, 1944, analysts at the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, known as FRUPAC, intercepted a Japanese naval transmission. FRUPAC was the successor to Commander Joseph Rochefort's legendary Station Hypo, the same code-breaking center that had helped win the Battle of Midway. The intercepted message seemed routine at first, a transmission from the submarine I-16 to the commander of Japan's Submarine Division 7, reporting a simple schedule, an estimated arrival off Bougainville in the Solomon Islands at 2200 hours on May 22nd. To most people, that would sound like nothing more than dull logistics. But to the trained minds of American intelligence officers, it was gold. Hidden inside that message was a clue, an opening to strike at the very heart of Japan's underwater fleet.
Breaking the Japanese JN-25 code was more than a math problem. It demanded both intellect and empathy, an ability to think like the enemy, to understand how Japanese officers wrote, planned, and communicated. Every intercepted message had to be recorded, sorted, and painstakingly decoded, half by machine, half by human intuition. And when the breakthrough finally came, that intelligence raced across the Pacific in minutes, sent through secure channels to the Third Fleet, and then straight to Commander Hamilton Haines, leader of Escort Division 39, based at Tulagi, in the Solomon Islands. Haines was no stranger to the hunt. A veteran destroyer commander, he had once stalked German U-boats in the Atlantic before being transferred to the Pacific theater. That hard-earned experience, learning how to fight an unseen enemy, would soon prove invaluable. When the decoded message landed on his desk, Haines didn't hesitate. He immediately formed a 3-ship hunter-killer task group, choosing the best anti-submarine ships available. His hand-picked team would consist of 3 Buckley-class destroyer escorts: USS George, DE-697, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Fred W. Just; USS Raby, DE-698, under Lieutenant Commander James Scott; and USS England, DE-635, led by Lieutenant Commander Walton B. Pendleton. For this critical mission, USS England was temporarily detached from her regular Escort Division 40 at Purvis Bay, Florida Island, to join Haynes's group. On May 18, 1944, the 3 ships departed Purvis Bay with Commander Haines aboard George as officer in tactical command. The formation wasn't random. Each vessel had been designed, trained, and fine-tuned for the deadly art of anti-submarine warfare. Their crews, many of them young, some barely out of training, had spent months learning to work as one, perfecting sonar tracking, attack patterns, and damage control drills. They had already operated together in dangerous waters, building trust through repetition until coordination became instinct. That hard-earned discipline would soon become the difference between life and death. Yet even as the task group steamed toward its target area, intelligence officers uncovered an alarming revelation. The Japanese Navy had deployed a picket line of 7 submarines, known as the NA Line. It stretched between the Admiralty Islands, north of New Guinea, and Truk in the Caroline Islands, right across the sea lanes American carrier groups were expected to use in their next offensive. The Japanese command had grown desperate. Their carrier fleet was crippled, their island garrisons increasingly cut off. Submarines were now among the few tools left to slow the American advance. The NA Line was meant to serve as an early warning net, a screen that could spot U.S. carrier movements and buy Japan time to respond. Each submarine had been assigned a rigid patrol zone, with orders to stay on station and report any enemy sightings. But that rigidity, the refusal to adapt, to move, to improvise, would soon doom them all. Back in Tokyo, Japanese strategists were convinced that General MacArthur's next major assault would strike the western end of New Guinea. The combined fleet's commander-in-chief, Admiral Soamu Toyoda, issued Operation A-Go, a desperate plan to gather what remained of Japan's air and naval power for one decisive battle that might halt the Allied advance and protect Japan's inner defensive perimeter, stretching from the Marianas to the Carolines and western New Guinea. The stage was set. As Admiral Toyoda's submarines took their silent positions, 3 small American destroyer escorts were already cutting through the dark Pacific waters, guided by the invisible threads of intercepted code. None of the men aboard could know it yet, but they were about to embark on one of the most legendary hunts in naval history.
In the chaos of Pearl Harbor, when smoke and fire consumed the Pacific dawn, courage still found a heartbeat. Amid the explosions and the cries for help, Ensign John C. England made a choice that would define him forever. He could have escaped. Many did. The battleship Oklahoma was already rolling, its hull splitting, water rushing into the lower decks like a living thing. But remembering the men still trapped in the radio room below, England turned back. Once, twice, 3 times he descended into the dying ship, each time dragging another sailor through the suffocating black corridors filling with seawater and oil. The ship's power had failed. Everything inside was drowned in darkness. England had to navigate by memory, by feel, one hand on cold steel, the other pulling men toward life. On his 4th descent, the Oklahoma shifted violently. The sea swallowed the corridors. Ensign England vanished into the ship's flooding compartments and was never seen again. He was one of 429 souls lost aboard Oklahoma that day. For days afterward, as the fires cooled and the wreck settled into the harbor mud, faint tapping echoed from within her upturned hull. Men still alive, signaling for help. Rescue teams worked through metal and oil, cutting through the steel tomb. 32 were saved. Hundreds were not. John England lay among the unknown for decades, buried at Punchbowl National Cemetery. Only in 2016, thanks to advances in DNA identification, was his body finally brought home to Colorado Springs to rest beside his parents. He had received only a Purple Heart, but his courage would echo far beyond medals. 2 U.S. warships would bear his name: USS England DE-635, and later USS England CG-22, a legacy forged from selflessness and sacrifice. The first England DE-635 was a Buckley-class destroyer escort, a lean, purpose-built submarine hunter. She wasn't designed for glory. Her guns were modest, 3-inch cannons for defense, a handful of anti-aircraft weapons, and a few torpedoes. What made her deadly wasn't brute force. It was precision. Every inch of her design was meant for one thing: to hunt submarines. She carried depth-charge racks at the stern, K-gun projectors on either side, and her most secret weapon, one that would change the course of the undersea war, the Mark X Hedgehog. The Buckley-class ships were the result of lessons learned in blood from the Atlantic Campaign, where German U-boats had come perilously close to strangling Britain's lifelines. The Allies realized that brute strength alone could not defeat the submarine menace. What they needed were ships built for patience, for endurance, for silence, and precision. They needed hunters. These new destroyer escorts had long range, steady hulls for rough seas, and sonar systems capable of tracing an enemy hidden beneath thousands of feet of ocean. The Hedgehog, a weapon born from Britain's desperation during the darkest days of 1941, gave them fangs. It didn't roar. It whispered death. The Hedgehog launcher looked almost absurd, 24 stubby spigots mounted on a tilting frame, like a porcupine of steel. But what it fired was revolutionary. Each projectile, weighing 65 pounds, carried a 35-pound charge of TNT or Torpax. Fired in a carefully timed salvo, they fell in an elliptical pattern, 140 by 120 feet, directly ahead of the attacking ship. And, unlike depth charges, they didn't explode on timers. Each one detonated only on contact. That changed everything. Depth charges, for all their noise and fury, often did little more than shake the ocean. They blinded sonar, created turbulence, and left commanders guessing whether they had hit or missed. A single attack might use dozens of charges, but sinking a submarine often required 60 such runs, sometimes 100. The Hedgehog changed the odds from 1 kill in 60 to 1 in 6. For the first time, the ocean hunter could see clearly. There were no blinding shockwaves if the attack missed. Sonar stayed sharp, tracking every movement below. Reload time dropped from 20 minutes to 3. The destroyer escort could strike again and again until silence gave way to the dull thud of a confirmed hit. To the men aboard submarines, the Hedgehog was terror in its purest form. Unlike the deafening explosions of depth charges, the Hedgehog attack came in silence. No warning, no time to evade. Only the faint splash of dozens of warheads entering the sea, and then, 7 seconds later, an eruption that split the hull like paper. It was a new kind of warfare, mathematical, merciless, and intimate. Each contact explosion struck with surgical precision. A single hit could rupture a pressure hull and flood a submarine before the crew even understood what had happened. The Japanese submarine I-16 would soon learn this the hard way. She wasn't just any vessel. She was a veteran, a giant among the Japanese undersea fleet. 358 feet long, displacing 3,561 tons when submerged. A Type C-1 submarine, she had once carried a secret weapon of her own, a miniature 2-man midget sub mounted on her deck.
It was I-16 that had launched the very first undersea assault of the Pacific War, long before most Americans even knew they were at war. On the morning of December 7th, as Japanese aircraft streaked over Pearl Harbor, 5 mother submarines waited in silence offshore. Each released a tiny 2-man sub built to slip beneath the harbor defenses and strike from within. It was a bold idea, a mix of ingenuity and desperation, but history would prove it futile. The midget submarines caused chaos but little damage. Most never returned. Some were found grounded on reefs, others destroyed by depth charges before they could fire. Yet their mission revealed something deeper, a glimpse into Japan's willingness to gamble everything on unconventional tactics, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And years later, far from Pearl Harbor, the legacy of I-16 and the hero she had once defied, Ensign John England, would collide in a final, haunting symmetry. For when USS England DE-635 went hunting in the Pacific in 1944, it would come face to face with a new generation of Japanese submarines, descendants of that same undersea fleet that had begun the war at Pearl Harbor. This time, however, the hunters were ready.
Before the first planes appeared over Pearl Harbor, before the world knew it was at war, the Japanese submarine I-16 had already slipped into the Pacific darkness. Under the command of Lieutenant Junior Grade Yokoyama Masaharu, she launched her secret weapon, a 2-man midget submarine, at 0042 hours on December 7, 1941. Its mission? To infiltrate the harbor's defenses and strike the anchored American fleet from within. It was an audacious plan, born from ambition and overconfidence. The Japanese believed these miniature subs could sneak past the nets, glide into the heart of Pearl Harbor, and deliver torpedoes into the bellies of American battleships. But ambition and reality rarely share the same course. Yokoyama's craft never returned. Its fate, like most of its kind, vanished into silence. Radio transmissions believed to be from the submarine were received later that afternoon, one reporting success, another the next morning stating navigation was impossible. Hope lingered briefly, but the truth was harsher. Post-war analysis revealed what the Americans had suspected all along. None of the 5 midget submarines succeeded in their attacks. One was sunk by the destroyer USS Ward, marking the first shots fired by the United States in World War II. Another was rammed and destroyed by USS Monaghan inside the harbor itself. One ran aground. Its sole survivor became the first Japanese prisoner of war captured by America. 2 others simply vanished into the deep. None of the mother submarines ever saw their charges again. Of the 10 men who launched into that doomed attack, only one survived the war, a ghost of a failed experiment. 6 months later, May 30th, 1942, halfway around the world, I-16 would finally achieve what had eluded her at Pearl Harbor. Operating in the Indian Ocean near the British base at Diego Suarez, Madagascar, I-16 once again launched a midget submarine, this one commanded by Ensign Iwasa Katsusuke. Under the cover of night, the tiny submarine crept into the harbor like a shadow. It fired 2 torpedoes. One struck home. The massive HMS Ramillies, a 29,000-ton battleship and veteran of World War I, shuddered under the blast.
The explosion tore open her hull, flooding compartments and threatening to send her to the bottom. Quick action and expert damage control saved the ship, but she took on 1,800 tons of water before stabilizing. Nearby, another torpedo found its mark on the tanker British Loyalty, sending her to the harbor floor. Though the British battleship survived, the attack proved the concept could work under perfect conditions. It was the high watermark of Japan's submarine special operations, a fleeting triumph that masked the truth. These missions were one-way tickets. Most never returned. As the war dragged on, I-16's role changed. During the bloody Guadalcanal campaign, she was no longer a hunter, she was a mule. Her sleek lines, once meant for stealth and power, now carried sacks of rice and crates of ammunition instead of torpedoes. She was part of the Tokyo Express, the desperate Japanese effort to resupply isolated garrisons cut off by advancing American forces. Each mission was a gamble with death. Submarines ran narrow straits at night, evading patrols, slipping through minefields, just to deliver a few tons of food to starving soldiers. The once mighty Imperial Navy had been reduced to feeding its dying outposts. On November 28, 1942, I-16 launched another midget sub, Ha-10, that successfully torpedoed the USS Alchiba, loaded with aviation fuel and ammunition. The ship erupted in flames, burning for days before being grounded to save her from sinking. It was a tactical success, but a strategic whisper. Japan was losing ground fast. By early 1943, I-16 helped cover the evacuation of Guadalcanal, ferrying supplies to bypassed garrisons in New Guinea. In December of that year, she survived an air attack with minor damage, a stroke of luck in a war that fortune was running out. Her final mission would come in May 1944. On May 14th, I-16 departed Truk Lagoon under the command of Lieutenant Commander Takeuchi Yoshitaka. Her cargo, rice, sealed in 75 rubber bags, a pitiful load for a once proud war machine. Her destination? Buin on Bougainville, where 40,000 Japanese soldiers were trapped, starving, and dying in isolation. By then, the garrison was living on roots and insects. Disease spread faster than hope. American forces had bypassed Bougainville months earlier, leaving the defenders to wither. Yet the Code of Bushido demanded no garrison be abandoned while any vessel could still reach them. It was loyalty and futility at its purest. But unknown to the Japanese, American intelligence had intercepted and decoded I-16's departure signal. The hunters were already moving. 3 destroyer escorts, including USS England, DE-635, were converging on her predicted path. On the afternoon of May 19, 1944, a PBY Catalina patrol plane spotted I-16 on the surface north of Bougainville. The submarine was recharging its batteries, exposed, vulnerable, unaware that death was already closing in. Japanese submarines of that era suffered from weak batteries and low underwater endurance. To make speed, they had to surface, and every minute spent above water was a minute in the crosshairs. The American ships immediately formed a line abreast, their sonars sweeping in a synchronized rhythm across the ocean. The pattern was like an invisible net woven from sound, a trap few submarines could escape. At 13:35 hours, England's sonar operator, a young sailor from Iowa who had never seen the ocean before joining the Navy, heard it. A distinct echo, a heartbeat in the deep. Contact. Range 1,350 yards. The hunt was on. Lieutenant Commander Takeuchi knew what was coming. He ordered evasive maneuvers, hard turns, sudden dives, radical shifts in speed. The submarine twisted and plunged through the depths like a wounded animal trying to break free from the hunter's gaze. Inside I-16, the air was thick with sweat and diesel. The crew worked in tense silence, every sound amplified. The hum of motors, the creak of metal under pressure, the steady pings of the enemy sonar closing in. On board England, Lieutenant Pendleton gave the order for attack. The sonar operators called out bearings and speed. The plotting team fed the data to the gunners. The Hedgehog crews prepared their weapon, the silent killer that had earned the ship her name. The first salvo missed. The second, too. I-16 was fighting with everything she had, releasing decoy bubbles, changing depths, executing sharp port and starboard turns that pushed her steel hull to its limits. On the third attack, England scored a hit. A single explosion echoed through the deep, muffled, distant, but real. Inside the submarine, chaos. The shock waves slammed men against bulkheads, shattered lights, and sent tools flying. But the crew recovered. They sealed the flooding compartment and fought on. Takeuchi's training showed. Japanese submarine crews were among the best in the world at damage control. The fight continued. Pendleton circled for another run. The fourth attack, another miss. By now, the hunt had stretched beyond an hour. Sweat dripped down the faces of men on both sides. On England, tension ran thick. The sonar men strained to keep the contact locked as the submarine dove deeper toward the thermal layer, a natural blanket of shifting temperature that distorted sonar and could hide a submarine from its pursuers.
But Pendleton and his crew were learning. They had studied I-16's movements, noticed her tendencies, always diving left when turning, always holding a particular depth band before slipping away. They set up for a fifth run. The ocean was still. The ship's engines hummed low. Every man waited. Then, impact. At 14:35 hours, the Hedgehog fired and several projectiles struck home. The sea erupted, a column of white foam, a thunderous crack rolling across the surface. For a heartbeat, silence. Then, an immense, shattering explosion. Below, the pressure hull of I-16 gave way. The ocean poured in. 106 men died in seconds. The sonar screen on England went quiet. No echoes, no movement, only stillness. The explosion was so immense that it hurled USS England's stern clear out of the water, throwing sailors off their feet and shaking the ship to her core. The concussion thundered across the sea. Distant destroyer escorts, stationed thousands of yards away, heard the deafening roar and felt the shock reverberate through their hulls. 20 minutes later, the grim evidence began to surface. Oil slicks bubbled up alongside fragments of wreckage, rice sacks, splintered wood, bits of cork insulation, the unmistakable remains of a submarine torn apart. Among the drifting debris were haunting relics of human life, a sailor's cap, the torn pages of a Japanese book, and a lone wooden sandal, each object a silent witness to the cost of war. The submarine I-116, once the pride of Japan's undersea fleet and a participant in the attack on Pearl Harbor, was gone, destroyed with all 107 officers and men aboard, including her commanding officer,
Lieutenant Commander Takeuchi. They perished in the service of a fading empire, carrying rice to an isolated garrison that would surrender long before the war's end. Meanwhile, 7 other submarines, the so-called naval line, departed Saipan around May 17, 1944, fanning out to their assigned patrol sectors. Their departure was marked by a solemn ceremony attended by Vice Admiral Pagaki himself. He spoke to the assembled submarine captains with words steeped in imperial duty, urging them to serve the emperor with unwavering resolve. Each commander received a ceremonial cup of sake and a white headband emblazoned with patriotic slogans, symbols of courage and sacrifice. They knew the odds. The sea had become a far more dangerous place for Japanese submariners. American anti-submarine warfare had evolved dramatically since the early years of the conflict. All 7 were RO-class boats, specifically the Type RO-100 series. These were small, 760-ton submarines designed before the war for coastal defense rather than long-range patrols. Each carried 4 forward torpedo tubes with a total of 8 torpedoes and a single 76mm deck gun. Their construction reflected Japan's pre-war naval philosophy, emphasizing craftsmanship and capability over quantity. But that doctrine came at a heavy price. Japan's submarines were well-built but too few in number, lacking the mass production speed that gave the U.S. Navy its overwhelming advantage. Most RO-100s were fitted with Type 22 radar detectors, devices that could sense enemy radar pulses, yet lacked radar systems of their own. This left them effectively blind, forced to rely on visual lookouts and long hours on the surface to fulfill reconnaissance duties. It was a perilous task. Without radar, they had to expose themselves to detection by radar-equipped American ships and aircraft. Of the 20 Type RO-100 submarines Japan would build during the war, not one would live to see the surrender. The first to fall from the naval line would be RO-106. RO-106 was no novice to war. She had already carved her name into naval history with blood and fire. On July 18, 1943, during the bitter fighting in the Solomon Islands, it launched a torpedo attack on the American tank landing ship LST-342 in Blanche Channel near New Georgia. The result was catastrophic. The torpedo struck true, detonating the LST's ammunition magazine. In an instant, the ship was ripped in half, her stern sinking immediately, while the forward section drifted aflame before being towed to shore. Among the 121 dead were the ship's entire mess division, African-American stewards and cooks, and Lieutenant Commander Mellon Barclay, the celebrated artist who had designed many of America's wartime recruiting posters before volunteering for active duty. It was a tragic loss that rippled far beyond the battlefield. Later that same year, in October 1943, RO-106 barely survived a brutal depth charge attack from Allied aircraft. Her battered hull managed to limp home for repairs, and by May 1944, she was back at sea, unaware that her end was near. In the pre-dawn darkness of May 22nd at precisely 3:50 hours, the radar operator aboard USS George detected a faint contact, a vessel running on the surface, unseen to the naked eye. It was RO-106, cruising under cover of night to recharge her batteries, a dangerous but necessary routine. Moments later, George's powerful 24-inch searchlight pierced the darkness, locking onto the submarine. The blinding white beam illuminated the sea, revealing the RO-106 caught completely off guard. Her Type E-27 radar detector had failed, leaving her unaware of the approaching enemy. On the bridge, the sudden flood of light destroyed the night vision of the watch crew. Panic and precision collided in those desperate seconds. The submarine's officer of the deck barked the order to dive. Crewmen scrambled down the hatch, sealing it behind them as seawater began to pour across the deck. The dive was fast, less than 40 seconds, meeting the Imperial Navy's strict standard. But it wasn't fast enough.
At 4:15 a.m., George unleashed a salvo from her Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar. The projectiles plunged into the ocean, detonating in a pattern of white foam and thunder, but the evasive submarine slipped free. 10 minutes later, USS England took over the pursuit. Her sonar operators, headphones pressed tight to their ears, tracked the submarine as it zigzagged through the depths at 8 knots. The first Hedgehog attack from England missed. Then, RO-106 made a fatal mistake. Perhaps intending to line up a torpedo shot, she turned toward her pursuer, unaware that the new American weapon fired ahead of the ship rather than dropping depth charges behind it. This maneuver placed RO-106 directly in the weapon's path. England's second Hedgehog pattern struck home. At least 3 projectiles slammed into the submarine's hull. Inside, the effects were instantaneous and horrifying. Bulkheads rupturing, electrical circuits shorting in showers of sparks, compartments flooding faster than men could seal them. In seconds, the submarine broke apart and plunged to the ocean floor. RO-106 was gone, taking all 49 of her crew with her. The entire engagement, from first radar contact to final destruction, lasted barely 36 minutes. But the hunt was only beginning. The next morning, May 23rd, brought another contact and another chance for England to strike.
At dawn on May 23, 1944, the South Pacific was a calm expanse of blue and gold, its deceptive serenity broken only by the low rumble of American destroyer engines combing the ocean. Somewhere beneath that placid surface lurked another Japanese submarine, RO-104. She had departed truck alongside RO-105 and RO-108, assigned to patrol the same deadly arc of sea as RO-106. Like her sister ships, RO-104 was a type RO-100 coastal submarine, small but lethal, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Shigeo Takagi. By the time she crossed into the England's patrol sector, her crew had been at sea for days, exhausted, sweating in the humid darkness, and unaware that the Imperial Navy's once proud undersea fleet was being hunted to extinction. That morning, radar aboard the USS Raby detected a faint blip, another surface contact 12 miles distant. It was RO-104, recharging batteries just below the horizon line. The Raby immediately alerted England and George, and together, the trio of destroyer escorts formed a deadly triangle, tightening their net around the contact. When England's sonar finally locked on, the range closed rapidly. The submarine attempted to dive and evade, but the Americans were now masters of anti-submarine warfare, swift, precise, and methodical. The first Hedgehog pattern exploded harmlessly in the depths, missing its mark. The second detonated too shallow, showering the sea with foam and shattered fish. But on the third attack run, at precisely 05:11 a.m., England's crew felt the unmistakable tremor of contact, a dull, deep rumble that rolled through the hull, followed by a rising column of dark oil and debris. Moments later, the sonar fell silent. The echo that had danced so vividly across the screen vanished into nothingness. RO-104 had been obliterated, crushed under thousands of tons of pressure, her hull collapsing like an eggshell. Every man aboard perished instantly. In less than 48 hours, England had sent 2 submarines to the bottom. For the American sailors, it was a stunning success, yet there was little time for celebration. The Pacific War left no room for sentiment. By the following night, May 24th, the convoy Hunter Group resumed its deadly work, now sweeping a new grid southeast of their last kill zone. At 20 hours, USS Raby once again picked up radar contact, another vessel moving on the surface at slow speed. This was RO-116, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Eiichi Yamada, a veteran officer of quiet discipline and methodical skill. The contact vanished moments later, diving before the American ships could visually confirm her position. The destroyer shifted immediately into sonar tracking, forming a line abreast to box her in. For nearly an hour, the ocean was filled with the rhythmic ping of sonar pulses and the murmur of men whispering range estimates through headsets.
At 2150, the England sonar operator caught a strong return, 1,800 yards ahead. Steady. Closing. The captain ordered all ahead full. Within minutes, the ship was upon the target. The Hedgehog projectiles leapt from the launchers, their white trails arcing through the air before plunging into the Black Sea. Seconds later, multiple underwater detonations tore through the night, followed by a column of bubbles, oil, and debris. The smell of burning fuel drifted across the deck. Another Japanese submarine had met its end. It was RO-116. All hands were lost. 56 officers and men. By May 25th, the England and her group had earned a grim reputation among the Allied fleet. Word spread fast through Pacific radio channels. A single destroyer escort had sunk 3 submarines in just 4 days, something no ship in history had ever achieved. But the hunt was not over. That morning, USS Hazelwood reported a new contact farther south, a large Japanese submarine believed to be RO-108. She was an older RO-class vessel, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Shigeshi Kuriyama, and her crew had been transmitting regular weather and reconnaissance reports to Truk. Those transmissions, intercepted and decoded by American cryptographers, revealed her exact operating area, sealing her fate before her crew ever knew they were being stalked. At 0500, England, Raby, and George closed in on the area. The ocean was calm, the skies clear. Sonar conditions were near perfect. Within the hour, England's sonar pinged again, a clean, solid echo at 1,600 yards. The attack pattern was textbook. The first salvo missed. The second detonated too shallow. The third, perfectly calibrated, struck home. 3 sharp explosions rolled through the water, followed by a fourth, larger detonation that sent a column of air and debris 200 feet high. Oil and shattered planks surfaced minutes later. RO-108 was gone. The 4th submarine in less than 5 days. In Tokyo, news of the losses filtered through in silence. Messages from the NA line ceased one by one, and the Imperial Navy Submarine Command began to grasp the scope of the disaster. Their boats, painstakingly built, crewed by Japan's best, trained for stealth and endurance, were being annihilated with mathematical precision. And in the midst of that chaos, one submarine remained, RO-105. She was the flagship of the NA line, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Toshio Sato, an experienced officer known for his calm under pressure. His mission was vital: patrol the approaches to the Admiralty Islands and report Allied fleet movements. But by the time RO-105 surfaced to transmit her final report, USS England was already closing in.
By May 31, 1944, the USS England had already carved her name into naval history. 4 submarines destroyed in less than a week, a record that stunned even Admiral Halsey's staff. But her mission was far from over. The 5th kill would be the hardest, the most relentless, and the most telling of all. The Japanese submarine RO-105 was the last of the NA line. Commanded by Lieutenant Commander Toshio Sato, she was a veteran boat, battered, experienced, and manned by a crew that had already endured months of combat patrols. She was on her way to relieve RO-108 when the transmissions from her sister subs suddenly ceased. The silence was ominous, but Sato pressed on. Orders were orders. Unknown to him, American codebreakers had already intercepted and decrypted Japanese signals detailing the NA line's patrol routes. Every movement of RO-105 was being tracked before she ever came into radar range. At 0730 on May 31st, a patrol plane spotted a long, dark shape on the surface, 280 miles north of the Admiralty Islands. The aircraft dropped a smoke float to mark the location and relayed the coordinates to the hunter group, England, Raby, and George. By 0830, sonar operators aboard England picked up a faint echo beneath the waves. The tension on the ship was electric. Everyone knew what this meant. Another contact, another fight. Captain Pendleton ordered full speed and swung England into attack position. The sonar pings grew louder, closer, sharper. The contact was deep, 180 feet, moving slowly, trying to slink away into the cold, dense layers where sonar could be distorted. The first Hedgehog salvo roared from the launchers, 24 projectiles arcing forward. They struck the sea and vanished, followed by silence. No explosions. Missed. The second attack. The same. The crew's frustration mounted. The target was maneuvering hard, diving deeper. The Japanese captain was a skilled tactician, using every ounce of knowledge to survive. For 5 grueling hours, the battle continued. The American destroyers coordinated attack patterns, one ship after another, taking turns in precision strikes. They dropped depth charges, fired hedgehogs, and weaved tight intercept courses. Each time, the submarine slipped away, diving into thermal layers or cutting power to drift silently beneath the churning ocean. The men aboard England were exhausted, drenched in sweat, nerves frayed. The sonar team's ears rang from hours of constant pinging, and yet they refused to let go. At 14:33, after the 6th attack run, England's sonar picked up a steady, rhythmic sound, the unmistakable cavitation of a damaged submarine propeller. They had hit her. A few minutes later, a cluster of explosions rocked the sea, Hedgehog detonations striking home. The crew held their breath. Then, a massive underwater blast erupted. A plume of dark oil, shattered wood, and human debris surged to the surface. RO-105 was gone. The sea that had been calm moments earlier now bubbled with the wreckage of what had been a proud Japanese submarine. All 55 crewmen perished. In 7 days, the USS England had sunk 6 enemy submarines, an achievement that remains unmatched in naval history.
When England returned to base at Manus Island, the mood was a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. Sailors disembarked with hollow eyes and trembling hands, still hearing the phantom echoes of sonar pings in their sleep. Yet they had achieved the impossible: 6 confirmed kills, all in rapid succession. News of England's victories spread like wildfire across the Pacific. Her name became legend. Admiral Ernest King, the U.S. Navy's commander-in-chief, personally sent a message: "There will always be an England in the United States Navy." Those words carried more than pride. They were a promise. The victories, however, came with a sobering reminder. Each sunken submarine meant dozens of human lives extinguished, young men who had fought with courage and skill. The Pacific, vast and indifferent, swallowed them without a trace. For the men aboard England, the triumph was shadowed by the realization of what war truly meant: survival through destruction. The ship's anti-submarine tactics became a model for the entire U.S. Navy. The use of radar coordination, precise sonar tracking, and Hedgehog mortars demonstrated the future of naval warfare, one that depended on teamwork, technology, and discipline. By early June, the Japanese Navy was reeling. The once formidable submarine force, which had threatened shipping lanes across the Pacific and Indian Oceans, was now being hunted down systematically. The NA line had been wiped out, its mission to defend Japan's outer perimeter reduced to a graveyard beneath the sea.
For the remainder of the war, the USS England continued to serve with distinction, conducting patrols, escort missions, and rescue operations across the Pacific. But she would never again experience a week like that in May 1944. 7 days that turned an unassuming destroyer escort into a legend. After the war, England returned to the United States to a hero's welcome. Her crew received Presidential Unit citations, and her name was etched into the annals of naval history. But, like many wartime vessels, her service was short-lived. She was decommissioned in 1945, struck from the Navy list in 1946, and eventually scrapped in 1947. Her physical form was lost, but her spirit endured. The U.S. Navy christened 2 new ships England in the decades that followed, a testament to the destroyer escort's extraordinary valor. Historians would later call her the most successful submarine hunter in history. Yet beyond the statistics, England represented something more: the transformation of war itself. She embodied the shift from brute force to precision, from battleship duels to technological warfare fought in the unseen depths of the ocean. And somewhere beneath those same Pacific waters, the wrecks of RO-106, RO-104, RO-116, RO-108, RO-105, and I-16 still rest in silence, memorials to the men who fought and died in the vast blue wilderness that defined the war at sea. Their fates, intertwined across distance and time, tell not only a story of victory, but of endurance, sacrifice, and the merciless nature of oceanic warfare. The USS England did not just change history, she rewrote it, one sonar ping at a time.